Okay, well, welcome to Transformation Alley by 24G, which is a new podcast that explores some of the trends and challenges of companies going through digital transformation. And I'm Rich Fahle. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at 24G, and I'm sitting here right now with Scott Weimels, who's the 24G CEO. How you doing, Scott?
Doing well.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. We also have a special guest today. Our special guest is Betsy Matz, who's the Executive Director of Experiential Production for Czarnowski, which is one of the larger experiential collectives in the country, with offices all over the United States and elsewhere. Welcome, Betsy. It's so cool to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we have lots to talk about. We are a partner of Czarnowski on many projects and worked very closely with Betsy, especially, before the pandemic, of course, with some of your physical events and some of the digital layers that you guys put into some of your events, but also in the during the pandemic, we sort of scrambled together, as it were, to sort of put together digital solutions for companies that came knocking on your door and ours to help them navigate some of the problems of that. We're going to talk about all that today. But what I thought would be cool to start with, Betsy, is really sort of a sense of what's happening right now. You guys really built your name on live events in the universe, in the world, and they went away for a long time, but they're coming back, and they seem to be coming back with a vengeance. But I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, somebody who built her career on live event production, what are you seeing at Czarnowski? What's happening right now?
Well, if you took a look at my calendar, my travel schedule, you'd find that I can corroborate that live events are coming back. They're coming back, as you said, with a vengeance, although that seems a little pessimistic. A more optimistic word would be they're back in full swing. Of course, there's new safety protocols. There's new concerns. We're approaching them in a different way. Some clients are a little bit more measured in their approach to bringing back live, and we're seeing still a lot of hybrid. But absolutely, Czarnowski is pleased to see live events really coming back, including trade shows and auto shows all over the world. Of course, Shanghai Auto Show was sort of the first one to come back in that space. And then now lots of brand activations, product launches, things like that happening in a live environment, press events finally coming back. So people are ready, and we are busier than ever, and we're seeing a huge upswing and back to live events.
Yeah, it's excellent. I know that that during that sort of digital period where it was all virtual all the time, I really felt like there was a lot of folks on the Czarnowski squad who were like, what is going on? How are we going to sort of navigate this? I feel like you guys have your sea legs again, and everybody's sort of jumping back. What Scott and I were talking about earlier is like all the concerts we're seeing, all the things that are happening, all the tour buses that are being rented. Are you seeing it all happen all at once, that everybody wants their events sort of at the same time? And what sort of smash and crash is happening on your side as you guys navigate all the people jumping back in?
Yeah, smash and crash is a perfect description. You and I have talked about this, but I really feel like what's happening is the pendulum is swinging way back the other way. People were so inundated with the virtual and digital solutions for so long by necessity that there's such a hunger to get face-to-face that we are seeing people packing. Summertime, which is traditionally actually a quieter time for brand activations, live events, because it's really more of a season for, like you said, concerts, things like that, is all of a sudden packed with activations because people need to get back out in front of their consumers. They need to get back out in front of their B2B contacts. And so we're seeing a huge amount of road shows going out, things that are smaller activations, not necessarily as big. But yes, the pendulum swung way far the other direction. We're seeing mostly live. But I do believe it's going to settle back into a more hybrid solution towards the fall and the winter, as we sort of see how things play out with the pandemic, with vaccinations and things like that. But yeah, it's a smash and crash right now. People are just scheduling on top of scheduling on top of scheduling.
Yeah, we'll talk about the hybrid thing in a little bit. I'm excited to sort of talk about what that might mean. But we're seeing the same thing, Scott, at 24G. A lot of our partners like you, Betsy at Czarnowski, are starting to come knocking again. And it was dry. There was nothing happening on that space. A good chunk of our business went out the door as well. But Scott, you're now in the midst of all this too, seeing all the commentary, the requests come in to 24G as well on the experiential side.
Yep, and it seems like it is back to normal, if not more, for the summer season. You know, the amount of proposals that we're responding to is just, it went from a trickle of 1 to 2 a month to 5 to 10 a week. And it seems like the demand also, it's events, right? So it's always not as much time as you want, but it's as much time as you're used to. And and on the other side of it is nice, even though we are a virtual company, it's the common expectation, understanding of what we're producing and how it gets done is there.
We've worked together, 24G and Czarnowski, in lives with you guys, as you said, layering in sort of engagement pieces that come more from the digital side. And we're seeing a huge demand for that as well. It's not only that live events are coming back, but it's almost like people are super sensitive to making sure there's lots of engagement and touch points. Like it's almost like it's a coming out party again for a lot of our clients. They want to make sure that anything that they're bringing to the table for their consumers has like a million different places to collect data. They loved that piece, right, of the pandemic scenario. They loved getting all that information. So we are, I'm sure you guys are just as busy as we are, and I happen to know that you are, and that's exactly right. We had 1 to 2 coming in a month, and now we're at 5 to 10. I would say that's about right for us as well.
Yeah, the good majority of those requests are coming from Czar, so we're aligned there. No, but it is interesting because there is more of like a data component that was not there prior. It's more upfront about, I want to see how this is doing. I want to see how are we connecting with the users and pushing them from one place to another. That trend is more than it used to be immersive digital and collect data. It seems to be more upfront in the requests coming in.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really happened in the virtual era. People really got very specific data about use, how long people were engaging, what they were doing when in each room they're in, how many people they talked to or met, or how many people actually came into the virtual booth. I mean, that data was just one of the bonuses, I think, of the virtual era that I think, as Scott said, people are coming out saying, how can I recreate that now in that physical event space where I get that kind of specificity on the data that's happening?
Yeah, we're absolutely seeing that. They want to calculate ROIs and KPIs, and we can now do that by layering those things in, and certainly our clients are much more aware of it than they ever were in the past.
That's an interesting transition, because I think there's 2 things that have happened. That's been happening for a while, like that migration or that desire, because I think the clients that were the older clients that are retiring, they loved having the glossy PowerPoint, with the big pictures of people, and that was their proof of success. And I think as the millennials and the Xers are coming into their own, the demand for data is there because it's always been there for them. So while they still want the glossy PowerPoint that shows what happened at the event, they want the data slides that go right behind that.
That they can plug into Tableau or Power BI or whatever they're using now to sort of prove that stuff.
And they don't want the glossy PowerPoint. They want the content capture sizzle video with all of the stats in flashy motion graphics, So you're right. There is a little bit of changing of the guard, especially in event marketing, that's been happening for the past 10 years. And this seems to have just, boosted it. I always said, Rich, to you, when we were going through the pandemic era together, so, we're advancing 5 years in 5 months, right? This was everything that was happening were things that were going to happen, but it was just now happening on such an expedited timeline. So I think even across live events, as we come back, it's going to be the same sort of thing. Things are going to start moving very quickly and evolving very quickly. So we're all going to have to stay diligent and stay on our feet. Yeah,
I love that. That's a cool segue as well. The acceleration of change that happened during the pandemic. I mean, Betsy, I know I see your enthusiasm for the return to the live event world, but I'm going to take you back, if it's cool, to rewind a little bit to March 2020, when we were working on a project together for South by Southwest. It was one of the first big conferences to fall. And, we had done some really cool things with you at the US Open, with Mercedes, and lots of phygital activities. And we were doing something similar for one of your clients at South by Southwest, a very big activation. And then that went down, and suddenly the world shifted, and your world shifted, and our world shifted, and you were getting calls from all of your clients, and we were getting calls from our clients as a digital provider, and it just got intense. But the reality was that we were working with in a world that was not there yet. I mean, if you Zoom was not a thing. I mean, it was there, but it certainly wasn't a thing. And yet the client expectations for the virtual event world were very, very high. I mean, it was not as if they wanted to give anything up. And so we were all building these custom solutions, running around like chickens with our heads cut off. But I want to go back to, for you at Czarnowski, that switch, that hard pivot you had to make. And I'd love to hear more about like what went down in your offices when it all became clear that everything was changing on a dime?
I mean, it was a huge learning curve. We, as you said, have always relied on mostly vendor partners to create our digital experiences for us. We do have an in-house visualization company that does some of that kind of work, but anything we were doing in the live event space prior to March 2020, we were mostly working with outside agencies like 24G. And when our clients came to us and said, "What do we do?" there wasn't really a executive leader that was already in place to create an emergency plan and to start getting ahead of how to keep the business afloat. Of course, no one knew how long it would last. No one knew really, like you said, there wasn't exactly a standard anywhere for any of this. The technology was at a place then that seems light years away from where we are now because it evolved so fast. So we really had quite a few conundrums to address. We didn't have infrastructure internally to manage. Our third party or our partner groups like 24G were also completely inundated with requests and with work. And then we also had clients that had no clue how to manage it. And we're just trying to keep their jobs, frankly. Most of our clients obviously are in marketing or events or corporate communications. So as the world stopped turning, there were a lot of people that were just looking at how do I spend my budget so I look like I'm doing, how do I stay in touch with my customers? How do I make sure, especially in the corporate meeting space, I still have to have these meetings. How do I do that? And so we really have this very, very steep learning curve to address very, very quickly. And that I think it seemed like an onion. Like we just kept peeling back layers and going, but what do we do about this? But what do we do about this? So I was one of the folks at Czarnowski that did have enough of a digital background and had been working with people like the team at 24G long enough that I think it was better educated than most. So I took a key role in trying to turn us over quickly into a virtual events company. We certainly learned a lot along the way. One of the things, and I want to address one of the things you talked about, which was client expectations. One of the things we really, I'm going to be completely honest with you, stepped in it on was having client expectations be far too high. We needed to mitigate expectations about execution and results. So the way that the technology works and the things you can control and the things you can't control. And then also that without adoption, we can make a great virtual event. We can make a great site. We can make a great digital experience. But the world only moves, your consumers only move as fast. Your internal people only move as fast as they move. So even just the adoption, we needed to be better, more knowledgeable for our clients on the strategy of virtual events so that we could manage their expectations. Instead of just focusing on what we normally do, which is, great execution, great content, without audience acquisition and that piece of it, we were, all that data is great, but if the data doesn't show that you've had really great hits or really great conversion or any of those things, then the data actually works against you, right? Because all of a sudden, something that was supposed to prove how much return you're getting on this investment all of a sudden shows that maybe you're not getting quite the visibility that you want. So I know that was kind of a long way around some of your questions, but just to recap, yes, steep learning curve. We very quickly put an infrastructure in place, and we learned very quickly in the first few months how we needed to manage our clients' expectations. And I think that if we had done that even sooner, we would have had an even greater success. And we had great success. We produced over 100 virtual events in a year for a company that maybe produced 10 virtual events in the last 10 years. I think that was a pretty fast pivot for us. So I was proud of our team for that.
Yeah, and Betsy, you became the sort of de facto expert, as you said. I mean, because you had some experience and stepped into it. But there was a team that you had to bring with you, and a sales team, and a production team, and then the clients, as you mentioned. And there was a heck of a lot of frustration at the beginning phases because it was so unknown, and I think people just aren't comfortable with that. But back to this idea of having to pull your own team forward, a reluctant team sometimes because it was so different than what they had been doing. They knew it was the direction to go, but they also had to put their fates in someone else's hands to some degree. They had to work with third parties. They had to just assume that it was all going to work. And of course, they wanted to sell like you've always sold, but it's a totally new world. And we had to do the same thing here. And I would love you and Scott to sort of compare notes on how you manage that internally at your various places.
I just love that you used the onion analogy because every layer you peeled back, you're like, I think it might be the last, but there was always some tears involved, because it was, for all of us, it was a moment where even if we're a digital solution provider, right, and we help with the digital transformation, we had never done that many complex programs at once. It was really taking a lot of the technology that we have on our enterprise side of our business, where you're setting large platforms that have to work 100% of the time with large users, and converting that product in real time to support our experiential partners and customers. And it was a moment where we would build 2 to 3 of those in a year, and the customer would use them for 2 to 3 years before they would maybe change their solutions up. And now we were building them one every week and having to tear them down the next week, right? Like it was, and so it happened. That tide happened. That turn happened so fast from from we can do this to we're doing this at a volume that is more than I've ever seen. And typically, with the experiential work, you're making something in the past. I think this is going to change forever. It's not small screen experiential, right, where they're doing it on their devices. It's more big screen experiential, being that you have a kiosk or a large screen and people are interacting with that. And that was the immersive digital experience. And now it's the opposite. It had to be on everybody's device, and it had to be with video chat and permissions. And it was just and then, by the way, the deadlines didn't change. The pressure of live experiential. And again, I think that's where, for us too, strategy and onboarding, it was new to us to even set expectations with Czar and others, because it was so new to us too. And so you're writing your best practices in the fire, right, of how this is going to happen. And I think while it was a challenge, I think that the industry is going to be forever changed, because I think that desire to now have that small screen interaction is going to be something that's going to be around for a while, and like I said, back in the day, it would be on a big screen, and you have one screen and one PC that might be driving that with some maybe cloud technology behind it, but it was just had to be on that, and you'd come to us and say, I need this changed in 2 hours, and we'd say sure. But now it's like, I need this changed in 2 hours, and by the way, there's 10,000 devices out there that has to work on, right? So it was new for us.
Yeah, and certainly on our side of the business, we did not understand the ones and zeros of how this all goes together. I mean, certainly our sales team didn't understand exactly what the timelines really could be. Our production team was learning it, and I think adapted quicker than most teams on our side of the business. But the digital guys are even saying we were a little unprepared. So you can imagine on the agency side how incredibly unprepared we were to manage. Scott, you said, the timelines didn't change. You're exactly right. In fact, they accelerated because people were going, I have to get something going. And so I think that was probably the first big hurdle, Rich, as you mentioned, that we went through together as partners, was even just slowing the fire hydrant, just saying, like, we can't say yes to everything. We want to say yes to everything, but it's physically impossible. It's a recipe for failure. And so learning to say no was a big, huge moment for, I think, both of our companies. And maybe that's where a little bit of the tension arose, because you guys had to say no. It was in the client's best interest for you to say no to certain things, and we needed to pass that no along. I don't know that it was always that easy for our team to do, because we're all yes people, right? We're in event marketing. We're yes people. We make things happen. We say yes, and so to be in a situation where it's just literally physically impossible to QA and to build those things in the amount of time that we have with the kind of functionality that we needed. And like you said, and then also to think about strategically, will this work from the perspective of it being even a good experience, not even just from the tech side, but from the actual experience side, when people are sitting in their kitchens, yelling at their kids, looking at it on their phone. I mean, like you said, Scott, immersive digital, usually in a live scenario, is immersive, truly, right? It can be environmental. You've got a lot of different simulations. Now, all of a sudden, we're having to think about, not only from the tech side, but from the content side, people are just sitting in there looking at their computer screens. So how does that all work? So I think there was just like a cascade of learnings that we made really, in the first 6 months that helped us. But we were already sort of in a pickle by then because we had more work that we could do.
Well, what's interesting what you said, Betsy, is because you're right. It was about 6 months of that churn. But meanwhile, under the surface, under our feet, the technology was actually improving rapidly.
Yes.
And there were new companies coming into the fold to provide services, and people had more options and selections, and everything was just getting more streamlined. And like keeping up, not only like handling an event with 25,000 people that you just had to make work, but also understanding how things are improving and how fast things are improving, and being able to communicate that back to your team was also really challenging for not only us, but I saw it for you as well.
Well, yeah, because you'd have it where one month you'd be like, we can't do that. And then the next month, because of the demand, there was some cloud provider that created some sort of service that we could now integrate into the platform experience. Be like, oh yeah, now we can do that.
Yeah.
And it'd be like, you just told, but it was literally that iterative process of trying out new technologies and immediately deploying them in the next instance of the job that you have coming. And so it hurt a little bit the credibility, but it was because everything was rapidly developing, including including this ecosystem to support it, right? So, and then throw into it, by the way, when you're handling 10,000 IT or 10,000 participants that work for a corporation, IT and security wants to get involved as well. So
yeah, we went through that one a few times, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and they didn't know what to think of these things, right? They didn't have that understanding that this is most likely a one and done. This is not a site that's going to live on. So the security, features and levels of security that we needed to pass might not be exactly the same. We had a lot of that kind of thing. And on the Czar side, we had to dedicate a person just to keeping up with the new technology, being a subject matter expert of what the available platforms were, what would work best in what use case. And it became a completely full-time job just to track those changes. And you're right, Scott, it was hard because the minute we said this is a great solution, there might be another great solution, or there might be something that was a better fit for our client. So we had to focus really hard. And then, then you have to communicate that out to your teams because, we're a fairly large company, global company. Then to keep everybody up to date and abreast is another challenge. So yeah, just, as I'm talking about it, it was very challenging. No wonder I was so crazy last year.
Not to mention in the virtual world, you're not just doing with the time zones and the countries and the different areas, you weren't doing like 4 different shows. You were doing essentially the same show, but across the time zones, kind of following the sun, and the incredible pressure of a 24-hour like period of 4 shows that were happening, and then throw China into the mix, with all the challenges and stuff we had to learn there. It was just absolute sort of gleeful chaos. There was lots of fun, and it was also incredibly hard and painful at times as well, as we sort of discovered on the fly, say that China has, issues with some of the features that we had built. Yeah,
we now have a partner in China for that, but just because you can have the platform translated to Mandarin doesn't mean it's going to work in a communist country. I think that's the lesson learned there. But again, it was happening so fast that it went from, oh yeah, we're going to have a few people in China to, it was, the video technology and communication. China doesn't like letting that kind of stuff in.
That's true.
So
no, and they can turn it off anytime they want. That was Correct. The thing, is even if we could get all of the right approvals, even if everything was done, every I was dotted and T was crossed. And that goes for internet outages. It goes for IBM servers going down. I mean, there's just a certain amount. And this was, I think, like I said, with client expectations, there's just a certain amount of this that absolutely is completely outside of your control. That's true in live events too, but I feel it much more deeply, because if they're only connected by this one string, then if you cut that string and have to take the time to retie it, you've got a total disconnect, literally and figuratively. You said gleeful chaos. I just want to also mention that as we're talking about all these challenges, I also want to celebrate that we had a lot of wins in this space. I think that we the process was often so painful that we didn't celebrate our wins enough. But we had a lot of wins in the virtual space, 24G and Czar together and also separately. So I just want to make sure that I'm sort of tempering talking about all these challenges with talking about the fact that we did, come a long way. We put out some of the best products and events that I saw throughout the pandemic. It was not always gleeful, but I do want to make sure we mention that there were some really good moments that were not challenges.
Oh, there really were. I mean, I feel like I'm really proud of that whole period. I do think there was some pain that you deal with when you're working on new things, but I looked at how everyone rallied and came together, and to your point, some of the changes that had to be made literally on the fly, and to see like how humans respond to that is pretty amazing. But I think one of the challenges we saw, Betsy, was that when we were joking earlier about this Louis C.K. joke where he talks about like he's in flight and the internet isn't working, and there's only been internet on flights for like however long, and people are furious that the internet's not working on their plane in the sky, and I think people's expectations really adjusted quickly. They expected things to work, and I think we all rose to that challenge and wanted to kind of put everything behind the curtain. We didn't want any of that chaos or confusion to show.
Well, that's live event though, right? Because even when something goes wrong, you don't break a sweat. You react on the fly, and a lot of times the customer doesn't know. But there's so many variables in this where what the wrong could be. You weren't in a place to be able to fix it. Say you have one of the most important executives that's at his house, and he's got 4 kids, and they're all on Netflix. Right. And now it's like the video is horrible. What streaming provider are you using? It's like, it's not our streaming provider. It's your Netflix streaming provider that's the problem. But like, in real time trouble, when you're in a live event, and also what I always loved about live event, it's very addicting, but it's the camaraderie of the people that you work with that have your back, and you're all in a physical space together. And doing that virtually, I thought was pretty challenging, because as soon as you're off the call, that chemistry is broken because you're back into your own silo on your desk working on a specific task to get something done, to move something forward. It's not like that live event where you truly feel like you're in the trenches together, and that I found very hard to replicate from a team perspective when you're in the middle of those firefights.
And everyone's in their own homes working from their computers, And
it's just like, but that chemistry on site, even when things are going sideways, but you know that you have the team there to the squad, as you say, that's special. And I found that it was hard for that in the virtual space to really recreate that. But again, to your point, it wasn't all bad. But innovation is not born on a warm summer day in a lawn chair with a beer. Innovation is born in the fire of when things are most difficult and challenging. That's how things move forward. We just happen to have 1.5 years of innovation. So.
So Betsy, you talked about earlier that everybody's sort of running towards live physical events again, and at least for the moment, not as concerned with the virtual component, but that you believe that there's a pendulum kind of effect happening, and that there is going to be, and we've already talked about some of the data needs, and I think there's some things that are more subtle than people even recognize that they're sort of building into their physical event. But I'm curious, as we talk about what hybrid events mean, and I know Czarnowski's done a lot of work on this, assuming that that's going to be the norm as we go forward. What is it in your definition and Czarnowski's definition of what hybrid means, and where do you see the synthesis between not just the digital side of physical events that we've always worked with you on, that sort of hitting a tennis ball against a touch screen, but more like that sort of virtual component that we all worked on for so long in the last year, mixed in with the physical event? How do you see that coming together?
I think it's going to, Czarnowski's kind of put together sort of a strategic approach called Hive Thinking, hybrid live. And, we are picking up a lot of steam with that with customers. It depends on their industry. It also depends on their global reach. I don't think global travel is going to come back ever, business travel like it was. So I don't know that people are going to be flying across the globe to attend meetings or events, which means that there likely will always have to be some sort of virtual solution, even if that's just a simple live stream. We are seeing that as people are approaching virtual now, the virtual component of their event, it's much more simplified, right? It doesn't have the feature set that they needed when it was a solely virtual event. So my feeling is that we are going to see a big boom through the summer, that people are going to be spending the majority of their budgets on the live activation. And we'll get to budgets in a minute because that's another sort of factor in this. And then as we see into the fall, they're going to realize that they're not getting the kind of attendance that they were expecting in the live environment, and that they need to add in some sort of a virtual component in order to get the same type of engagement that they were having pre-pandemic. The other thing, as I said, budget is people are learning now that if you are, whether you're doing it for 200 people or 2,000 people, that live event costs the same amount of money, right? So if you want to do that live event and then you need to add a virtual component on to get the other 1,800 people involved, that costs more money. And so I think that's another thing that's happening as people are sort of negotiating, figuring out, okay, what is the investment in the virtual compared to the live? How much am I going to capture through this virtual? So I think there's just a lot of sort of like the beginning of the pandemic. There's a lot of sort of confusion around where people should be placing their dollars, how they should be engaging. I think that's going to continue to evolve and clear up as we get into the fall, and we're going to see people getting back into adding a virtual component. As I said, maybe a little more simplistic than it was, during the pandemic, but certainly, live streaming is huge, right? Streaming. And that's going to be a big piece of it, is that if you're having some sort of a live event, at the very least, it's streamed out to an audience that can comment and interact, and that can still be a part of the event, even if they're not there in person.
Yeah, Scott, what do you, because the virtual platform that we built, there's some features now as we move into the physical world that we're getting a lot of interest in, like the content library and some other elements or extended sponsor opportunities. What are you seeing from the platform that we built and hearing from some of the work that you've done recently where that virtual platform has value in that physical event space?
It just depends on the client. I see, because that my thing is I feel like hybrid. I love, by the way, Czarnowski's Hive. I think that's an excellent way to approach, because it immediately sets the strategic conversation to have with the customer. And I really do like that, because in the end, what live and hybrid looks like, it depends on the customer. It depends on the why. What are they trying to achieve? Because for the conference providers, you have the need that I think they're waking up to realize, I can monetize two audiences, right? I have a live and I have a hybrid. They may want something more like a full-fledged VXP or comparable experience, because they're actually trying to get them to, they're realizing that some people may not have ever gone to their events, and now they'll attend something that's maybe a little bit more of a robust interactive program. So that's my thought with that. But then what it means to other customers is more on the brand activation side. What does it mean to have a comparable brand experience that is online that complements the live event? And one of the ideas that we were riffing with the client with a few weeks ago was they were looking at doing, it was like an escape room. And so they were looking at creating a physical escape room where they would use, we'd be using Raspberry Pis and maybe videos to capture the actual interaction in that escape room. That becomes a branded activation asset. But then we've also done virtual escape rooms, right? So why not combine those two things together, where the shareable asset of their friends experiencing that brand, the brand experience of that escape room can then be used as a shared leveraged asset of when they share that with their social followers, that they can then experience the virtual, one that's happening in the virtual space. So I think what it means will mean different things to the different customers, but those are the two things that I've seen is like, how do you leverage the brand activation and maybe find a qualitative way that you can provide the people who share out from that brand activation a comparable experience? And then on the conference goer side, how can I monetize a virtual audience while maintaining my live audience? And do I want them to interact to have a meaningful collective experience?
That's I was about to say that, Scott, is that you bring up a really interesting point. When we first started going back into live, there was a huge demand from clients. I need my at-home audience, my virtual audience, to feel connected to my live audience. I think they're realizing that is not necessarily completely conducive or pivotal to the success, that there is an opportunity for there to be two different experiences. And this is also something they learned when they were purely virtual. They were always trying to recreate the experience of being there live. It's not going to happen. Being in a virtual audience is different than being in a live audience. Not embracing that and figuring out what is the right way to engage these individual groups of attendees, from my perspective, is one of the things that we need to learn from our mistakes during the purely virtual period. And as we're coming back into hybrid and Hive, we really need to say, look, think really carefully about whether your particular event needs that. Do you need those audience members that are live in person to really interact? And we're not really seeing a huge amount of desire or success there. So while you said some, maybe they do, maybe there's use cases for it. I think it's also about evaluating each particular business case and saying, you know what? Your live audience should have this experience, and your virtual or digital audience should have this experience. This is how we tie those things together. And it's not necessarily by video chatting the two.
Right.
It may be something different.
I agree with you completely. And that's the why of what you're trying to do, because there's some sort of key performance indicator, some sort of driver that they're trying to make. It should be based on taking that audience and making that KPI happen. It's not about making them interact together. And if I could just tell a little anecdote, because when we were checking out other virtual platforms, and a lot of people took it very literally, like they built virtual convention centers, right? And so right. Rich and I had the opportunity to do one of those where it's like an avatar that you can walk around, and it was like almost like more like Roadblocksy than it was like very VR slicky. And there's both of those solutions out there, and I've seen them both. But this one, it was like the characters were all clunky, and as I'm like walking to get to the exhibit booth that I'm trying to go, I'm like, this is everything I actually hate about a trade show that I now have to do virtually. And there was this one point where they had a keynote speaker, and this is like a big World Health Organization kind of thing talking about COVID that I was able to get us a couple tickets to. And they had the lecture hall where this guy was speaking, and he has a little avatar on stage doing his thing and talking, and then they had the iMags behind him of the actual guy on video. I'm like, that's cool. There was no permission, so there's one guy from the audience walked up on stage and was jumping on the head of the keynote speaker, and they're like, George from Alabama, we can see you. Can you please get off the stage? And he's just sitting there jumping on the keynote guy, and it's a very serious topic, and it's like, it's those kind of things. Like, I just think, again, if you do it wrong, there's a moment to finally challenge the why you're doing it. And I think that your perspective is exactly right. It's not about necessarily having them video chat together. It's about what are you trying to achieve? And if you trust us, let us help you figure out the best way to do that, both live and virtual, right? And it's not going to be a solution of just recreating that physical space. And it's not going to be a solution of just making sure they can video chat with each other. It really has to drive some sort of performance indicator that is converting the audience to whatever the behavior or action is that the client's trying to achieve.
And that's like just par for the course for events in general, live or virtual or hybrid or anything. You always have to take it case by case. That's one of the interesting and also challenging things about this kind of work, especially in an agency environment like we both are, where we have multiple clients and they all have different business cases. And even within one client group, they may have lots of different business cases. And it's really about making that evaluation. I think what's made this particularly hard in hybrid and in virtual is that, we've had years and years and years of experience of evaluating those things and figuring it out from a live events perspective. It was just about, like we said, the acceleration of having to figure that out very, very quickly, learn from mistakes very, very quickly, create strategies on the turn of a dime, and then convince our clients to use those strategies. Because some of the time you can tell people you don't want a clunky Robloxy avatar-driven virtual event hall. That's not going to add anything to your experience. But by gum, if they want it, they're going to have it, and they're going to spend all that budget that could have been, dumped into content or engagements or things that would really make a difference in the attendee experience are now all of a sudden dumped into, some clunky 3D environment or whatever. And sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. There was just there's a little bit of learning on our side that had to happen. And there's a lot of convincing our clients that, no, we've watched these things succeed and we've watched them not succeed as much. So let us help you come up with a solution that's custom to what your business problem is.
Yeah, we saw that, Betsy, even in when it was all virtual for a while with the simulive versus live component. We're really kind of convincing some of the clients that because they're so used to everything being live in a live event, but understanding that when you moved into virtual, that the idea of simulive, pre-recorded content that appears live and that you can even answer, you can follow up with live questions afterwards, is maybe safer and better and more predictable for the event like that.
Yeah, that was a big one. It's like, why are you taking this risk? What are you gaining from it? You're not gaining anything from this. So listen to us and you know, let us, of course, we were, as you said, establishing best practices as we went along, but we very early on had a few, you know, and trying to get clients on board with that was a little bit daunting at first. Although I think particularly we had some clients that started with us, went away to other providers, and sure enough, circled right back around to Czar and 24G because they went, oh, you guys are actually quite good at this. And some of the things you were saying to us, we probably should have listened to. So we had that happen quite often, I believe. Man,
I think that hand-holding was so important during that whole time. And it was really one of those things where everybody just needed to know somebody was in their corner, and an off-the-shelf solution sometimes just doesn't do that because you're just left to your own devices to figure it out. And because we were often figuring out some of the new features with them, I mean, we were there to hold hands throughout the entire thing. I think it really helped. And it helped when we were working with you guys as well. I think that was one of the things that I loved about the partnership with Czarnowski. I mean, we were really in it with you guys, and it was ultimately, I think, really beneficial for both companies.
It was absolutely. It was a great partnership, and even though, as Scott said, we weren't able to be in a physical space together, which I agree with you, is whether it's the team being in a physical space and being able to hash things out in the moment, or being in a physical space with your client and being able to establish that trust and walk them through what can go wrong, what might go wrong, how we'll be prepared for it. Missing that was something that couldn't be fixed or replicated. And honestly, as I'm getting back into live and seeing my clients face to face, I'm like, oh my gosh, you could just get so much more done more succinctly. But 24G and Czar certainly developed relationships across the business that, you know, we couldn't have gotten through it without you guys. So we appreciate that.
Good.
Sorry if I yelled at you.
You were never. I think I might have been the one yelling. We'll get to that later. I do want to talk, Betsy, about just your own career, because what's really interesting to me, you've done a lot of different things. You've become so knowledgeable in all things experiential, all things event, and now virtual events as well, and the hybrid component that will come out of that era. But your path to this was circuitous. I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about, first of all, how you came to Czarnowski, but what is it? How does one create a career around experiential, and how did you do it? Well,
that's, you really eked it out. I'm the jack of all trades, master of none. No, I consider myself a generalist. And that does come from trying a lot of different things. My undergraduate degree is in production design. I worked in the film and TV industry in Los Angeles for several years. That lifestyle wasn't what I wanted. And so I continued and took sort of that theater background and went into some live events and shows. I did that for quite some time. And then I worked more back on the video content side, worked on the agency side, internally for certain companies. I worked, my most pivotal shaping job that I ever had was that I worked for Mattel, the toy company. And I worked in what they called their worldwide trade show services division, and eventually ran that division. And it was a trade show division, but it was everything. It was basically their in-house experiential agency as well as their content agency. So we were doing everything from, world record stunts, building 6-story high, versions of their Hot Wheels tracks and running real cars through them, to toy shows, huge gallery toy shows in Nuremberg, Hong Kong, all over the world, Mumbai. Then shooting content, creating road shows. Barbie is moving, doing partnerships with Chevy to create a real size Hot Wheels that was a limited edition Chevy vehicle. So roller coasters, branded roller coasters, and theme park environments that were all Mattel branded or Mattel brands branded. So that was really the place where I was like, oh, I'm taking a piece of my knowledge from here, adding it to a piece of my knowledge from here, adding it to a piece of my knowledge from here. And I think that's what we're really doing at Czar, because Czar initially was truly a trade show, exhibitry, design and build. In the last 10 years, we're evolving into what we call the Collective. And the Collective services our clients on such a variety of verticals, content creation, digital, virtual events, corporate events, brand activations, branding, true agents, creative agency, and advertising work. So now we have all these verticals. And actually, that's, I think, what makes me an asset to Czar, is that I've kind of touched on I know enough to be dangerous about everything. Generalist producers particularly are undervalued these days. People think, oh, I didn't focus on this one thing, so I'm never going to be, excel in the industry. It's like, I tell my producers, that's the absolute opposite of the truth. Learn enough to be dangerous about everything, because ultimately, and now especially post-pandemic, everything's layered. Everything's going to be layered. It's going to be a live event. There's going to be digital. There's going to be virtual. There's going to be content creation that goes into that. There's going to be graphic design and show running. I mean, actual live event show calling. I mean, there's just so much technical expertise, all of those things. You have to, if you really want to be successful in experiential, at least on the production side, but I believe on the creative side as well, because creatives, you can't be an effective creative unless you understand a little bit about how it gets done. So I really feel like becoming a generalist is the what I would encourage people in the experiential industry to do. Know enough to be dangerous about everything.
That's great advice, Betsy. And you're a hustler, that's for sure. And I think everybody sort of feels that your business is sort of built on hustle. And you have to be able to be nimble and move in whatever direction is called for. And you have to be able to do it without necessarily showing yourself breaking a sweat. And you do that really well. And it's fun to work with you. And I loved going through the pandemic with Czarnowski. And I especially liked working with your whole team. That really... that means you're busy and you have another meeting and we're going to have to let you go.
I'm sorry. That's my 15 minutes.
Yeah. I catch that. That's a good cue for us. But I really loved working with you as well, Betsy. You just had that sort of joie de vivre throughout the whole thing. And I know we joked about the tensions, but it really was, I think, salvaged by the fact that you're just one of those hustlers that knows how to just navigate around problems. And if you step in it, how to get out of it quickly. And that was what I think was so fun to work with you guys at Czar.
Well, thanks. And I feel the same way about you and your team. I think ultimately, and this goes for no matter what kind of work you're doing, if you don't enjoy the people that you're doing it with, it especially in a quick, fast-paced industry like this, where there is such high expectation, then you're sunk. You have to enjoy the people that you do. You have to respect them. And so I appreciate that compliment. And you do have to work hard. That never ends. Like whether you're managing a team of people that are doing things, or whether you're one of the doers themselves, or whether you're strategizing about how to engage or deploy that team. It's a fast-paced, demanding industry. And like you said, you have to be ready to hustle. So I guess I always tell my husband, if I stopped, I'll die.
All right. Well, we'll run with you. We look forward to the next phase of our partnership. And in the meantime, I want to thank Scott Weimels, our CEO, for being here. Betsy Matz from Czarnowski, thanks so much for joining us today. And for everybody who's watching, don't forget, you're watching Transformation Alley by 24G, and you can follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and all those great social platforms. We hope you do. Betsy, thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Fun to talk to you guys again. I hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah, come visit us in Detroit.